Oi oi internet! In this video we are going to go over the reduce function that you will find in JavaScript and TypeScript and some other similar scripty languages. I find this to be a very useful function. It makes for much more elegant code. The one thing you should be aware of is that not all browsers support reduce, so you should probably check where you're trying to actually develop the code for, because if you want everyone to be able to use your code, if they're using really old browsers, they might not be able to use reduce, but that's becoming less and less of an issue nowadays, so I won't worry too much about it. So let's go ahead and do this. I've created a little file called reduce.js, and I just stuck two functions in there just because it's boring to write those. They're just going to be functions that log our output, so we can see which one was the reduce one and which one was the for loop one, or the alternative way of doing things. Just because when I was learning how to do reduce, it was all very well to see the function reduce and see what it does, but it was very hard for me to understand what it does in reference to what I would normally do or what the alternative ways of doing it was. So that's what I'm going to do in this video. So let's start off by creating a cheeky little array. 1, 2, 3. There we go. And we will start by just basically summing all of the elements in the array. So how would you normally do that? Well, the way you'd normally do that is you would say, let total equal 0. You'd say for num of array, do this, and you would say total plus equals num. And then you would say, we can just say log loop total, and that will give us our total of 6. Quick maths. But we could do the same thing in reduce. So if I just wrap it around our little login statement here, so in log reduce, what I can do is we can simply say array.reduce, and then what you do with the reduce function is you pass in what's called a reducer function. Okay, and typically you're going to see it with two arguments. One is called an accumulator, and the other one is going to be the value you want to do stuff with. So if I pass this in now, we say ACC for accumulator and val for value. And what we can do is we then use the arrow syntax, and all we have to do here is just say plus val, so accumulator plus value, and close that off, and that will do the exact same thing. So I need to explain some of what that's doing, because it's a bit weird, that syntax, because when I first learned about this, I couldn't figure out how it seems to know what the value is as it adds it over, because it looks like one statement, and we'll go over what it does, but let's just check it actually outputs what we want. So if I do node reduce.js, yep, so we can see it outputs 6 for the for loop, as you'd expect, and 6 of course for reduce as well. So it is working. So how does this actually work? Well, what reduce does is this accumulator, this function here, is a callback. So for each value in the array, right, we execute this bit of code here. So it is roughly equivalent to doing a for loop, in the sense that we are looping over things. It just doesn't look like that as much and produces this slightly different syntax. So for each value in the array, we go over this function. This function is a callback, which is how we end up with this accumulator, right? This accumulator, because all we're doing here is we're adding the value to the accumulator. This accumulator on each call basically retains the value. So it starts off in this case as 0 because nothing has been done, right? The first time we add the value, we add 1 to the accumulator. Then the callback happens. The reducer gets called again. This time, this value is 1, and this value is 2 because we're on the second iteration. So you add that to that, and it becomes 3, and so on and so forth until we finish and complete the reduction. So that's how reduce works, and hopefully that's explained it and made it a little bit more clear. Next, we're going to do another example. There's going to be quite a few examples I'm going to do in this one. This example is a common task you'll have to do, and it's taking an array and we want to sum all the elements of an array, but we want to start from some arbitrary index. And to do this, we're just going to modify the code we've already got in place here. So in order to do this for the for loop, the more common way of doing it would be to do something like this. So we say let I equal, and we'll have start index. We'll define what that is, and then we'll say well, I is less than array.length, which we want to say I plus plus, like that, and then change this to be I, like that. Okay, now we need to define that start index, and we can just say const start index is going to be equal to 1. So we're going to start at the first one in the array, or the 0 index. So we're going to start at 2 and then go to 3. So we're going to expect this output is 5. And then to do the same thing for the reduce, well, how can we change that? Well, the way we can change it is we can just simply say slice and then pass in the start index, like that. So now we're expecting both of these to return 5, and they do. Alternatively, of course, we could have done the slice in the for loop. So just to go through that real quick, we could do for let num of r, and then we do slice and do start index. So you can still get somewhat concise syntax with a for loop. If we get rid of that, do that, it will do the same thing again. Why have I done that? It's because there's not a second one of those. And now it's working. Okay, so that's just another way of doing that. So another thing we can actually do to make the reduce syntax more concise is we can take the reducer and we can define it on its own. So we could say reducer, and we can do accumulator and the value, and if we did the arrow syntax plus val, like that, and then we took this, whoopsie daisy, and we replaced it with reducer, like that. I think I'm missing a bracket. I'm missing a bracket, what a fool. Okay, and this will work like that, and now you can see it works again. So we're getting 5 again. This is, really useful because we might want to use that same reducer again, because this is just, summing everything up. So we could have this defined in one place and then use it multiple times without having to sort of redefine it each time. That's quite useful. Another thing we can do is flatten arrays. Now I've got a nested array defined already so that I don't have to type the damn thing out. But let's go ahead and use a reducer to flatten an array. So to do that, let's just do this. Let's knacker that off, pop this up here, and we'll start doing our flattening. So how do we do a flatten with a normal for loop? Well, the way we do that is we would say let, I think we can actually do const there. You do const flat array, like this. Get rid of the start index, we don't need that anymore. Get rid of this actually, we'll just do it again. What we can do is we can do for array of nested arrays, what we want to do is say flat array dot push r, and then we want to log the flat array, like that. What we can do for a reduce though is we can do it in a slightly more concise way. So let's get rid of some of this stuff that we were using. So we're going to do the reduce, get rid of the reducer, and create a new one. The way we do this is we're going to say the same accumulator, same value, and we do the arrow syntax, and instead we can actually pass in its own little function and do return accumulator concat and then the value. So we're expecting that it's going to return basically 1 to 12 in one array if we do this now, and I'll explain what's going off with the reduce one because it's slightly confusing what it's doing. Oh no, we're back to the usual videos where I have balled something up calamitously. What have I done wrong? I didn't even see the error. Ugh. Let's have a look again. Here we go. Right, so where's the error? The error is cat is not a function. It's because what? That makes no sense. I've put something somewhere that shouldn't be there where it is. This is ridiculous. That's there. Array concat. You know what the issue is? I'm an absolute buffoon. I haven't done the reduce on the nested array. Yes, the reason that didn't kick off at me is because JavaScript won't kick off at you for those sort of things. Although it might have done if I'd have used strict, I'm not sure. Okay, so now we can see we have our results down the bottom. Like I say, it was going to do 1 to 12, 1 to 12. It's a flat array now, as opposed to having this nested array of arrays. That's something you will have to do many a time when you're programming. And let's explain what this actual reduce method is doing, right? So we've got our reducer, but this time it's slightly different because it's got its own return value. So the accumulator now is essentially going to be an array. So what we do is we take the accumulator, which initially is nothing. When we do the concat, we basically create the array. Then when we do the second concat, because remember this is a callback, so it goes over every value in the array. Now value in this case is not the numbers, but it's the actual inner arrays themselves. So for each one of these, we are going to concat. So we're going to take the value, which is the inner array, and we're going to put it into the accumulator array, which is now going to be flat because that's what the concat one does, because we're taking this and pushing it into another array, but only passing the values in, if that makes sense. So that's what that reduce is doing, and that's another useful thing you can do with reduce. A final thing I wanted to cover with reduce is that you can also sum values of objects. So again, I've got another example ready. In fact, let's just knacker all this off, and we'll start with this new array. So this is an array of people. One of them's called Dave, one of them's called O'Long Johnson, and they have ages, and we want to find out what's the age of everyone, like what's the sum of the ages of all the people in our array. Now of course, to do this with a for loop is quite easy. We can do this by just saying, let people age equals 0. Very much the same thing we've done previously. We can just say person of people, and we'll say people age plus equals person dot age, like that. And then we can just do our log loop, and we'll log people age, and that's going to output 50. And we can do the same thing again with a reduce. So let's do it in our our log statement here. We can do, and make sure I get the right array this time, people dot reduce. Then we want to pass in an accumulator, and we make it clear we're going to pass in the person this time. I need a second bracket here because I've forgotten it. Again, do our little arrow syntax, and what we can do is, all we need to do here is we can do plus, and actually we need to do something slightly different. I've done something slightly wrong here, because if I was to do this now, not only would it kick off because I've made several syntax errors here, like person doesn't equate to age, but it would also, if I was to switch age here for person, what it's going to output is it's going to output off the top of my head, it's going to output object, object, and then 20 because of how this reduce works. So if we try that, we're going to get 50, and then we're going to get this object, object thing. And I'll show you how to fix that, because this is a common thing that I've seen all over Stack Overflow, that people don't know how to do this with reduce. So if we run it, oh, it's slightly wrong. It's logged object, 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 object. Because if we were to do, for example, person.age, it would then do, yeah, object, object 20. The reason it's doing this is because what we actually need to do is we need to use another function prior to doing the reduce, and that function is a really cool function, and it's called map. So here we can just say map, which makes sure I get all the dots right. What map will allow us to do is take the person, okay, and then we can just map it to person.age. And what that now does is, so we're taking the people array, we're mapping it, so for every value in the array we want to map the person to person.age, meaning that what comes out of this map, right, and goes into the reduce is just the ages of the people. It doesn't pass in the whole person object, it only passes in the age object. Well, that's how I think about this. So then when we do a reduce, we can do reduce, and we can do reduce on just the age. I've named it age there, you can name it anything you like, but the only value it knows about is the ages. So then when we run this, it's going to work because we've been able to map the ages correctly, and you can see, you know, it's worked 50 there and 50 there. So that's about everything I wanted to cover in this video. Hopefully this has been useful. I've gone over some of the examples in a sort of a bit of a belabored way, purely because when I was learning this sort of thing, I just couldn't figure out what the hell was going on. It seemed very confusing to me. The for loops were there, I'd used them before, and reduced, the syntax is so different to it that I thought I'd best go over this with a few examples so everyone can see clearly what's going off with the reduce. So hopefully this has been useful. If you liked it, you know, leave a comment and a like. Maybe subscribe if you want to see more videos. Oh, this is the shameless self-promotion that all YouTubers do. And if you have any questions, stick them in the comments, and I will try and answer them all as I usually do. And so yeah, thank you very much for watching. Bye bye.